Good evening. My name is Mark Healy. I'm the Township Planning Director. I want to thank and welcome everybody for showing up tonight. So as you can see on the screen here, the Township is doing a master plan evaluation of the Township's business and industry district. There's basically two areas of town where a variety of business and industry uses are permitted. Up until recently, warehouses were permitted. Obviously, is probably the reason why many of you are here, is because of a lot of the issues that have arisen due to warehouse development. So the Township's evaluating not just warehouses, but the business and industry zone as a whole. We're still somewhat in the preliminary or initial stages of that evaluation. One of the main beginning analyses is an evaluation of the traffic in the area. We've hired a consultant, Brightview Engineering, to help the Township with this study. And the first thing that they have accomplished is an evaluation of existing and future traffic conditions in and around the BI zone. So the purpose of tonight is for the consultant to give an overview of their presentation of that issue, again, existing and future projected traffic conditions. Dave Roberts is from Brightview Engineering. And with that, I'm going to hand it over to Dave and have him take over.
Thank you, Mark, and good evening, everyone. Thank you all for being here, both here in the room, and I understand this is also being shared online through the Township's television technology. So welcome everyone who may be watching as well. As Mark indicated, I am representing the team from Brightview Engineering. I am the planning lead on the team, and just to give you a little bit of background on myself, I've been practicing for about 43 years. That explains the gray hair everywhere. And I have some prior experience with Township of Franklin, having worked on the master plan back in 2006. We were the lead. I was with a different firm back then. We did both the master plan and the housing element fair share plan, which was quite it had quite a bit of community involvement involving that plan. So my familiarity with Franklin goes back to that, as well as spending 7 years at Rutgers University. I see a Rutgers hat out in the audience. And I was both undergraduate for for environmental design, landscape architecture, and then a master's in city and regional planning, all from Rutgers. So my familiarity with this area also goes back to those days as well. Also on the team is John Jar, who's the managing and founding partner of Brightview Engineering. John has had extensive experience, and he and I have been working together for decades with over several different firms. He had also had one of those firms had an office here in Franklin. So his experience goes from driving the roads back and forth to work, going back quite some time. And then also a principal at our firm is Joe Fissinger, who was a former county engineer for Somerset County. So obviously he knows the county roads especially well and knows the township roads as well. So that gives you a little bit idea about who the team is. What I'd like to also do is to acknowledge and thank the mayor for being with us this evening, Mayor Kramer. And also we have a steering committee that the township has put together, that a number of individuals, and they were selected based on a cross-section of the community, representing various communities in the township, various involvements on committees and other involvements for the township as public servants. So I know there's a number of steering committee members here with us this evening. I would ask if they are to stand and introduce themselves so that all of you can see who they are. Maybe start with just give everybody an idea of your involvement with the township.
Dave Robinson. I live in Somerset Run, and I've been interested in the warehouse thing since the B9 development, and Mark chose me to represent the community in this endeavor.
My name's Terry Thorson. I'm former science supervisor of Franklin High School. I've lived in this town since 1968. In the area of JFK Boulevard, and I'm concerned with the traffic in that area.
I'm Bob Thomas. I'm the chairman of the zoning board. I'm also on the planning board. I've been a resident. Our family's been here for 50 years. I have a daughter that graduated from Franklin High School and a grandson that went through the schools also. I have had the benefit, if you want to put it that way, of seeing some very substantial changes take place, especially in the traffic and the roads, and I'm glad to have a part in maybe helping it be a little better. Thank you.
Good evening, everyone. Councilman Ram, I'm also in the steering committee as well as the planning board. So we undertook this study based on a lot of complaints that we heard during the B9 hearing, and you all know how that ended up. So we are looking forward to hearing the findings and building the foundation to our master plan review.
Hi, my name is Kiki Anastaskos, and I want to thank the mayor and the township for inviting me to be on this committee. I am relatively new to Franklin Township, just 2 years, but I have lived in Somerset County for almost 20 years, so I'm not a stranger to the area. And my recent involvement in the community has been with regards to the warehouse, especially B9, and I have been involved with the Citizens Warehouse Action Group, or CWAG, for those of you who are familiar, since its inception. So, yeah, thank you very much to the township and Mr. Healy and Mayor Kramer and the council for doing this community event.
So I am not on the committee, but I just wanted to give you a little bit of perspective. So we do have this steering committee. The planning board is also going to be involved in the process. I mean, ultimately, there's going to be a document prepared. The planning board is the entity that adopts the master plan. And then at some point as well, the township council, after the master plan, there may be zoning recommendations that's basically the law that dictates how land can be developed, and that's done by the Township Council. The steering committee was chosen, or we decided to do a steering committee, so that we have kind of, again, kind of a cross-section of the community to act as somewhat of an, well, not somewhat, but in an advisory role, steering the planning board, steering the process, both in terms of the planning board and the council.
Okay. Thank you, everyone. Well, what I'd like to do, and to give you a little bit of a background of what we hope to do tonight. First of all, it's great to see such a great turnout. Whenever you advertise a community meeting, you never know what kind of a turnout you'll get. So it's very gratifying to see all these folks. We're hoping that, since probably the most important thing that we're trying to accomplish tonight is to convey information. To give you background as to what the purpose of the study is, what we hope to accomplish, and the sort of steps and areas where you can plug in. One of the things I'll mention is that the township has set up a project-specific page on the website. We're going to be uploading this PowerPoint presentation. We're going to be uploading minutes from the steering committee meetings, so you can kind of follow along. The steering committee is critical to this effort, and that's why I wanted to introduce them to you, so that you know who they are. And if you see them, you can ask them how things are going. They'll be having meetings pretty much at least once a month for the next several months, while we are trying to evolve this from what I'll share with you tonight, which are really our preliminary findings, kind of like what we gathered, what we analyzed, and what we found. That's really what we're trying to communicate with you this evening. And then also in the intervening months, also getting feedback from you so that we can have some of the things that we're contemplating in terms of action steps, because this really isn't just a matter of, it's just not just an academic exercise. We want this to be a useful, even though it's a master plan and it's an advisory document, that's what master plans are for land use, we want it to be as informed as possible so that the township not only the township residents can be equipped, but more specifically your boards, who are volunteers who are appointed and put up and give up a lot of their time to review these applications, that they are as equipped as they can be to handle not just the applications that they've already received, but any applications that they would be receiving in the future. So we're hoping that we can try to narrow down the issues, and particularly the connections and the interrelationships between land use, which would be the development that's occurring on the ground, the traffic that it generates, and then the impacts on the, particularly on the intersections. The roadways in general, but mostly the intersections. That's where you get annoyed when you can't make a left turn. Those are the things that impact everybody on a daily basis, particularly Monday through Friday, particularly in the morning during the rush hour and in the evening during the rush hour. So that's what we're going to be talking about a little bit tonight. I want to start out by giving you a little bit about how we started, when we started. We really needed to be able to collect data right away. And there was two requests for proposals. I almost went, letters on you there with RFP, but a request for proposal, there was two, one for the traffic component and one for the planning component. Brightview was chosen because we submitted for both, and that gave us the ability to coordinate them as part of a team. And that's why we put a team together that had both traffic experts and a planning expert. So that's what, when we started kind of wrapping our arms around this, we were basically in a sponge mode where we're just trying to gather and absorb as much information as we can. From a land use perspective, there were a number of planning documents that the township directed us to review. And I'll get into the kind of the chronology of how we got to this point that we're in this evening with regard to especially the warehouse development, which is what everyone's concerned about, not just in Franklin, but pretty much anywhere where there's a highway, where there's a potential of building a warehouse. Those towns are going through similar experiences as you are. And then what we also did was, so just to kind of regroup there, we knew we were going to analyze 14 intersections. Those were from the traffic scope point of view. They were already identified by the township in that request for proposal. So we knew that gave us a way of responding as to how much time that was going to take, how much resources that was going to take. Those key intersections, I'll show you where they are on the screen in a minute. But those were the focus of the data gathering. So we had decided after we first started talking to the township a little less than a year ago that we would combine our efforts in doing traffic counts at key points within the business and industry zone, as well as add the information that was provided by the county and any other information we could gather from other sources. For example, the Township Police Department puts out what are called automatic traffic counters, ATCs. You probably run over them when you're driving up and down the road. They were gathering information for a number of months on volume, which is the amount of cars driving up and down the road in a given day. Things like that. In addition to that, Mark's office uploaded 38 different traffic studies from warehouse projects that they had been reviewing over the past several years, so that we had the developer's idea of what the traffic was supposed to be coming from those projects, and we could analyze that as well. So what we then did was gather all of that information up and start to run models. Our traffic people started running models with it. And what I'm going to show you tonight, what I'll start out with is, there's really two major zones that are business and industry, zoned business and industry. The graphic on the left, and I broke the township into two parts, the north and the south. In the north, you have your largest zone, and that is kind of bounded by the Route 287, Western Canal Road, kind of running along the northern side, pretty much down to Schoolhouse, a little south of Schoolhouse, and then you've got really from Weston, for the most part, there are parts of the BI from Weston Canal over across when you get to this part of the township, the eastern part of the township. Then the southern zone is really much smaller, and that's really just you can see kind of to the right, Veronica Avenue is kind of the backbone that runs through the middle of it. A lot of the properties in that industrial zone front on Veronica Avenue, and Veronica is kind of the connector between Route 27 and Hamilton Street and JFK Boulevard, that area in there. So there are two different business and industry zones, and we were tasked with studying the intersections in those two zones. The 14 intersections, there's about 3 of them in the southern zone and 11 in the northern zone, and the northern zone being much, much larger. Just to give you a little bit of context into where industrial zones came from, in 2018, the existing zoning was analyzed from an economic standpoint. Now, in 2018 is right before we started getting into seeing the kind of the explosion of online purchasing. It was sort of the beginnings of it. The zones that you had primarily were the M1, the manufacturing, 2 different manufacturing zones, M1 and M2. And your general commercial or CB zone. And these zones, the manufacturing zones permitted your traditional industrial uses like assembly, manufacturing, warehousing, et cetera. And with warehousing, the traditional warehouse has always been the storage warehouse where, at least traditionally, things were brought there for storage for periods of time. So they were not high traffic generators. They were just, not quite as low a generator as a self-storage facility where things could stay in a storage unit for months and months and maybe even years, but still very low traffic generating use. That was before the distribution warehouses evolved in response to the online explosion of online retail. Now, the recommendation from 2018 was that the zones should be combined into a business and industry zone, and if the uses were expanded to include both office, manufacturing, et cetera, that there would be more economic development potential in the township. So that was based on a consultant that did an economic analysis, and it was really to try to be strategic about allowing ratables to come in to the township during that period of time. Well, with only 2 years later, everyone knows that in 2020, the e-commerce exploded because of the pandemic. And everybody experienced it. I don't have to explain what happened there. We all lived it. But as a result, between 2020 and 2023, that's when the township got effectively flooded with applications in response to the demand for distribution warehousing, especially because of you have an exit ramp right onto 87. So any town along an interstate highway was going to be a target. And you had a zoning district that allowed warehousing because the definition of warehousing was so broad. It just said warehouse. It didn't say what kind of warehouse. So, and you do have some traditional warehouses in town that have been here for years, but what the township experienced between 2020 and 2023 was this flood of distribution warehousing, not the least of which is the Amazon warehouse, which is now already built and operating. So in 2023, as Mark alluded to earlier, the township kind of like slammed on the brakes. And the only way that the most immediate way that the township could do that was to take warehouses out of the list of permitted uses in the business and industry zone. So one of the things and that's when they said, we got to do something about this, and we need to do it in a informed way, because whenever you tell a developer they can't build a use that they want to build, that's when you get lawsuits. So the township has been getting sort of assaulted from a number of different sides as a result of this phenomena of this flood of development. They are trying to say, put the brakes on and do an analysis, which is why they did the RFP, which is why we're here tonight, to be able to come up with a strategy to try to get the zoning kind of up to date with the industry, warehousing industry, the way it is today, which is so much different than it was even a few years ago, and then come up with some ideas of how to manage it. We may not be able to change it and turn the clock back, but we can try to manage what we know about. So to get you a little bit in terms of what we found, when we got all of that information from the township, from Mark's office, they sent us everything, every application that had been approved and built, every application that had been approved but is under construction, and then every application that has been submitted but has not yet been acted on. And we mapped it all. I should say Allison Serrano of our team mapped it all using Google Earth. So this is actually a map that you see on the right is a blow-up of the northern business industry zone area that I described to you earlier. The map in the lower left corner, it's difficult to see, but these little green and white blotches that you see on the map, those all represent warehouse sites. And it's a pretty, it's a pretty sobering illustration of just what the township has been going through, especially the boards that have been handling these applications. Because you see a lot of green and white. That means that these projects are either already built and operating and putting traffic on the roads, or they're about to be putting traffic on the roads. So one of the things we did was we took the existing traffic counts and all of the analysis that I just described to you, which includes the area that you see shown in white, because they're already operating. So their trucks and their employees and their whatever are already on the roads, and those were counted as part of those counts. The ones that are in green are not yet putting trips on the roadway system. So we took their traffic studies, we went over them and did our own assumptions, and added those trips in as kind of the second level of analysis. And that's what I'm going to show you first. And when I'm just going to, you see in the lower right-hand corner of the large image on the right, just to kind of repeat because this is going to be online, so you'll be able to take a closer look at it. In fact, I'll turn it into a PDF so you can zoom in real close. And Mark, we could even share, if we don't have it already, the KMZ file, so that if you want to add that as an option under your existing GIS mapping, interactive mapping online, you can really even zoom in even more. You can zoom in, zoom out, which is what we've been doing when we've been analyzing this over the last number of months. The white, again, is constructed and operational. As you can see, the biggest white blotch is the Amazon warehouse, which is over by Western Canal and Cottontail. So it's no shock that you'll see that that's one of the impacted intersections. And then there's a number of much smaller sites that are along these north-south spines of Elizabeth and Pierce and so on that run up and down from Schoolhouse to Western Canal, generally, or to 287. And then the orange means that the application is pending. That means it's been submitted, and there's a sort of a sideline point to that that gives you an idea of what Mark and his office and the planning board and zoning board have to deal with. There's a little nuance in the municipal land use law, or at least the case law that goes along with land use, that once you submit an application, even if the zoning changes, the board has to consider the application under the zoning that was in place at the date that the application was submitted. So if you know that the township removed warehousing as a permitted use in 2023, only a year ago, a little bit more than a year ago. So if developers knew that, they got an application in before that ordinance became effective, okay? And some of these applications were not even to the planning board. A couple of them were to the zoning board for involved use variances. So that's one of the reasons why we have the red color, that there's really only a couple of those, and those are applications that were submitted but denied by the township. So I just want to explain that carefully so that you have an idea, when you see the map up close and can see it a little bit more and sort of zoom in on it, kind of what you're looking at. And that's why we'll have both this PowerPoint and the actual map. I can put the map layer there too so you can see it right on the interactive mapping. Now, this gives you an idea. This is basically where, this is a zoom, the 1 through 14 are the 14 different intersections surrounding the business and industry zone that we were tasked with analyzing. And as I mentioned before, that traffic analysis involved traffic counts and a level of service analysis. Now, I'm going to explain what that is. Many of you, especially any of you who have ever served on a planning board or zoning board, have probably already heard this, because every time you hear a traffic expert from a developer, that's a witness for a developer, they always explain it. And level of service is basically how an intersection performs. And there's basically categories A through F. I don't know because I'm not a traffic engineer, I'm a planner, but it's based on the amount of time you have to wait before you make a movement, turning movement, whether it's to go straight, make a right, make a left, etc. Usually, it's no shock that usually the most challenging move is a left turn, because you have to negotiate past oncoming traffic to do that. So there are levels of acceptability in terms of what's considered to be a normal waiting time when you're at an intersection to be able to make those turns. And basically, just to sort of generalize it, if you're an A through D, well, A through C really means you're not experiencing any delay of any consequence that would cause you to get annoyed or get impatient. When you get to D, you're starting to notice there's a little bit of friction getting through the intersection. When you get to E, the friction is getting to be to a point where it's annoying. But the critical thing that we looked at is the level of service F, because it's no coincidence that F kind of means it's failing, that the wait time is unacceptable. And that, for example, if you're at a traffic light, it may mean that you have to wait a couple of cycles before you can get through the intersection. And there's a couple of very obvious intersections already that you're experiencing that at, and so there was no shock that came out in this analysis. For example, Easton and Davidson, classic example. There's pretty much no turning movement you can make at that intersection that is anywhere close to an acceptable level of service during the peak hours. That's the other thing I want to make sure I'm emphasizing. What I'm talking to you about are analysis of trips trying to make it through these intersections during the peak hours. And generally those peak hours are what our traffic volumes have identified as when the most traffic is coming through from one period of time to the next. And they normally are in the morning and in the evening. However, we also included an analysis of Saturday trips and Saturday performance of these intersections, and there is one particular intersection that showed up on Saturdays, which was Schoolhouse and Weston Canal, where your existing situation right now is that making a left turn on a Saturday, or usually midday, is difficult. That's an F level of service already. So there are a couple of intersections, and I'll kind of try to point them out to you where you're already experiencing an F level of service. And then what we try to do with after we added the intersection camera data and the automatic trip recorder data was kind of run them through the models and come up with projections. If we were to add those trips into the model, what would happen to the level of service on those intersections? So what we found, these are first of all, before I get to that, these 14 intersections, you are putting them back on the map. So you can kind of get an idea of where, and we numbered them, as I showed you before, and we are showing them on the map in terms of where they're located in business and industry zones. As I said before, there's 11 in the north and only 3 in the south. The 3 in the south that were analyzed were Veronica and 27. Veronica and Hamilton at JFK. Those were where traffic on Hamilton comes into conflict with traffic coming out of Veronica or down to the southeast along Route 27. You can almost see that it almost forms, these intersections almost form a circle of that northern zone, where traffic from other parts of town are trying to move through that area, and they're coming into conflict with traffic coming out of the existing development from that area. So that gives you a little bit of an idea of the geographic concentration. Now, when we start to get into remember the 14 intersections, we start to get into the findings. What we found is, I mentioned the Western Canal Schoolhouse already. That's that left turn on a Saturday during the midday period, and once you add the projected development, it goes from an E to an F. That's on a Saturday. As you move across, number 3, and these are only the intersections, by the way, just to back up a second. We only then focused on the intersections where we saw there was an F level of service. So if you don't see an intersection on these slides, it means that there was an E or better level of service, even with the new traffic added in. Okay? So the next one that would be number 3 is Schoolhouse and Randolph, and that's the left turn in the evening. And then that's with the added traffic. So that's going to fail if that added traffic is put in at Schoolhouse and Randolph with that evening left turn. For Schoolhouse and Elizabeth, it's the southbound left turn in the evening. For Weston Canal and Randolph, that's an overall F, which means that morning and evening, it's failing with the new traffic, and that's a right onto Randolph or a straight trip to the intersection. Western Canal and Cottontail is another problem intersection for left or right from Western Canal onto Randolph, onto Cottontail, or a right from Cottontail onto Western Canal. So the volume on Western Canal has got to be pretty significant, and you can imagine that a considerable amount of it's coming from the new development. Then we have the Western Canal and the 287 ramps, and that's the traffic trying to get off of 287 onto Western Canal and making either a left or a right. And that will be a failing condition with the new traffic added from the approved development and even the approved development not constructed when those trips are added in. So you kind of get the feel of it. Now what we did was we decided to go even further and kind of look at what as best we can anticipate, given all of the applications that have been submitted, not just the ones that have been approved, but even the ones that are in the pipeline, because they account for vacant parcels in that business and industrial zone, that we need to assign something to them in terms of the future trip generation as these properties develop. So we took the data that we actually had from proposed applications, since they show something on that property, they show a certain size building, they show a certain amount of parking spaces, so we can get some kind of a basis for making an assumption about what that property will yield. And we added those trips in too, and tried to see what would happen, assuming that, and it kind of just confirmed what we kind of already suspected, which is the areas that were already failing were going to fail, but even worse. In other words, the wait time just increases. It's still an F, but the wait time still increases. So we're looking at a bad situation that will get worse, and there are a couple of changes, and that pretty much sums up all of the first 7 intersections, 1, 3, 4, 5, 6, and 7, where I just described on the prior slide. The one difference is that on the left for Western Canal, for Randolph onto Western Canal, it's not just Saturday now, it's evening and Saturday. So even in the evening, Monday through Friday, that's going to be a failing left turn, unless something is done. It changes for it. Weston Canal, 287 ramp, same, any one of those, you'll see that when you add that, it's basically, if you remember the map, the white, the green, and the orange added in now. Whereas before it was just the white and the green. Now it's the white, green, and orange. The only trips we didn't add in were the red because they were denied. Now, something else may be coming in. There may be litigation which causes them to be reconsidered. There's all kinds of things that can happen. But we felt that for the purposes of this analysis, we wanted to wanted to get the application, make an assumption that the applications that didn't require use variances, that at some point, some version of them will get approved. They might get revised or modified, but some version of them will get approved, and add those trips in to the analysis to give ourselves at least a conservative idea of what we're up against. Then we get to the other intersections. This is, 9 is Davidson and Pierce. And you can see now there's 2 left turns, one southbound left and one northbound left, where just the white and the green generate, when the green's added into the existing traffic, generates the F condition. Now, one other thing I need to point out that I haven't done so far is that it's not just the trips that these applications are generating. The traffic projection assumes there's background growth going on as well. So there may be other projects that happen, just background growth in general, and I believe the assumption was a 5% background growth in addition to these trips that are from specific applications, just to give you an idea of how the traffic engineers try to look into the future and try to get a snapshot of what it could look like. And then getting back to the intersections, Davidson and Easton, overall F and existing and with the approved development that hasn't been constructed yet. Let's see, Veronica and 27, you're coming straight into town from New Brunswick across 27. That's an F with the fully approved applications added in, and the straight application on the straight movement on 27. Veronica and Hamilton, it's the left turn again, and that's the westbound left turn. And then in JFK and Hamilton, it's the southbound left turn. Most of them are left turns, and that's what we had talked about before. And again, when you add in the applications that have not yet been approved by either of the boards, it basically just reinforces the F movements. Again, with Davidson and Easton just being looks like spaghetti up there with all the arrows. So that's basically the general point of what we're at now in terms of identifying the intersections that are in trouble or are going to be in trouble with just what's already in the pipeline. And then if what's in the pipeline that hasn't been approved gets built, then it's essentially what we're up against. So we've identified the problem, and the problem's significant. And now the question is, how can we react to it, and what should we do? And this is, as Mark started out the meeting, this is a master plan re-examination. And generally, according to the municipal land use law, re-examination reports have to be done periodically, but no less than once every 10 years. Now, the township already did a re-exam report about warehouses last year, which resulted in the prohibition of warehouses in the business and industry zone. This re-examination report, because it will have the traffic underpinning it, the traffic analysis kind of undergirding it, is really to support what recommendations may come out in terms of how to react. And now there's 2 different ways that react, and the master plan and zoning regulations can only handle the land use aspects of that. Traffic improvements happen in another vein. The planning board and zoning board really don't have any control over that. However, one of the things that we talked about at the steering committee is that, especially members that had so much experience on these boards reviewing these applications, and they all have traffic reports submitted as part of the application. And those traffic reports typically conclude that they're not going to significantly impact the performance of the intersection, at least not what they generate specifically from their project. However, when you look at 38 of them and you start to add them up from a cumulative standpoint, it gives you a little bit of a different picture. And really looking at that map and seeing all that white and green, not even, putting aside the orange and red for now, that I think it's going to be helpful to have this master plan amendment that the board can hold out to these developers in the future and say, what about this? Now, in some cases, you may say, well, it seems like the horse is already out of the barn and we're trying to close the door. And that may be, to some extent, an honest evaluation of where we're at. But that doesn't mean, and as we've talked about, that there won't be opportunities in the future, because you pretty much the lowest hanging fruit always goes first, right? So if you have a vacant property, that's going to be the first thing you look at, because you don't have to spend any money tearing a building down or reconfiguring the land. That doesn't mean that in the future, when all the low-lying fruit has been taken, that there won't be additional development that's going to want to come in and do, maybe take a hotel and convert that to a warehouse, or take an office building and convert that to a warehouse. So what we're trying to do is, first of all, figure out a way to, we think that because the business and industry zone is so big in the northern, especially in the northern part of the township, that there may be some rezoning that needs to happen to shrink that area down. And maybe if there is going to be, since there's so many different types of storage warehouses are probably harmless, it's the distribution warehouses that are the problem. And there are so many different types of them. Some of them are really not as much of a problem as, say, some other use like an office building or a hotel, as far as traffic goes. Others could be far worse than an office building or retail. So we need to parse them out and be more intentional about if they're going to be permitted, where they're going to be permitted, and draw the boundaries around them a little tighter. And also get an idea of I didn't mention before, but in addition, one of the questions you might have is, well, what about the trucks? When you have a line across the road and you run over it, it could be a truck, it could be a car, how do you know? Well, they have it's a little over my head as far as explaining to you how it works, but I can tell you that the heavy vehicles are accounted for in the analysis, in the assumption. So we have, it may not be perfect, but we have a pretty informed idea of how much of the traffic of it is heavy vehicles and where they're coming from. So that in terms of, okay, what can you do about this? There's issues like there's signalization things that you can do to make traffic flow better. That means basically it might be a township road, but most likely it's going to be a county road, because most of these roads that run and connect roads typically are owned by the county. And the signals that are along them, which are where we're having the issues with the intersections, are probably also under the jurisdiction of the county. That doesn't mean we can't pinpoint them and make recommendations on how to improve them. And one of the ways to do that is to basically computerize the signals so that they work better. So those are things you can do without touching the geometry or the way that the intersections are laid out. The other thing that we talked about in the steering committee is, that the steering committee members brought up, is some of these intersections were never designed for trucks. So the trucks can't make the turns. And when they make the turns, they run over the curbs and things like that. So that's an existing condition that the planning board can't do anything about, at least not for the applications that are already through the pipeline. But there are some suggestions that we've been discussing that we're trying to find a way to capture, first of all, identify the improvements that need to be made, whether it's signalization or whether it's reconfiguring the intersection geometries so that the turning radiuses are more effective, and then capturing the cost of that and trying to be able to assign that to future developers. That's when, again, you will say, well, isn't the horse already out of the barn? And maybe maybe two-thirds of the horses out of the barn, but maybe we can capture the last third and get some contributions to some improvements to the intersection. So it's really going to be, or in terms of the next steps to this, as I said here on the slide, evaluate the land use and zoning solutions based on warehouse type, which I've just described, evaluate the boundary and zone classifications for the zoning map, and just so you know, the zoning map has to be, if it's changed, it has to be done by ordinance. And if it's done as part of a re-exam report, then the boundary changes do not require notice to everyone in the zone and everybody within 200 feet of the zone boundary. So that's why it's often most effective to do it as part of a re-exam report. That's one of the reasons why the township is going in this route. So there may be zoning map changes, and I would expect at least a few. And then the draft re-exam report, which will have those recommendations kind of reduced to writing with a draft of the map. And as that gets developed over the next few months, that information will start to populate that website that we talked about at the beginning of the meeting, so that you can kind of follow along and see how this is happening. Just to explain the master plan process, that draft report will be going to the steering committee. The steering committee will be getting work product as it's produced and evaluating, giving us feedback. They're kind of like the focus group representing the rest of the township and giving us feedback from the township on that. Then the draft report, once the steering committee provides its comments and we make whatever revisions we need to make, then the planning board is going to get a crack at it. They'll see a draft, and we'll get comments back from them. When they're comfortable, because ultimately they'll be adopting this, they'll be the ones effectively taking ownership of it. And these recommendations are not just for the zoning map, they're also for the zoning regulations. So that report would have the planning basis for the changes, as well as the recommended map and regulation changes for the ordinance. And that, because the re-exam contains ordinance recommendations, once it goes to adoption from the planning board after a public hearing, so hopefully folks will be kind of following along as this goes over the next few months and come to the public hearing to make sure that your feelings and your comments are heard. And then once it's adopted, a copy goes to the governing body, because the governing body is the one in charge of making the ordinance changes. So that's really just a kind of a simplified outline flow chart of what we have to do to get this report to the point where it's effective. Once it's adopted by the planning board, that is a factor for reviewing applications. The planning board can use it as a way of really kind of keeping the developers somewhat honest. It becomes a underpinning of decisions that they make, and it also helps to support any legal challenges that are brought as a result of those decisions. So there's more planning basis and policy basis for those decisions that they make. And that's kind of what we're expecting to come out of this. So I hope that you've been educated as much as I can this evening to give you an idea of what we're trying to do. I hope that you will keep an eye on the township website and look for that web page. We'll start populating it probably as of after this evening, because this PowerPoint's going to go up there, and we're working on a draft traffic summary. And once Mark and the committee have had a chance to review that, that'll go up there. I will be preparing, this meeting has been recorded and has been broadcast. So if you run into neighbors and others that you may have noticed may not have been here tonight or may not have seen it on the TV broadcast, please tell them about it. Tell them they can get up to speed if they're interested. They can watch this whole presentation will be uploaded, the whole recorded meeting, and the meeting's not over by any means, because we're going to, in a few minutes, open it up for any questions or comments. And we want to be clear that it doesn't end tonight, that the feedback part of this will be ongoing. So Mark described to me the way that he's designing the webpage is that there'll be a comment section on there. Any comments that you put on there will go directly to Mark, and Mark will relay them to us, and we will be reviewing them as we kind of follow along. We don't have all the answers by any means, but we're going to do our best to try to come up with something that makes sense. And we may change some of that based on your feedback. So your feedback is needed and is very important to the outcome. So I thank you I probably went on a little longer than I intended to, but I wanted to be as thorough as I could and as trying to anticipate what you might be thinking and to try to bring it up during the discussion. So I think the next slide is mentioning the future meetings. Just to give you an idea of the schedule, I would anticipate that now that we have as much of the traffic analysis as we think we're going to be able to chew on, we're going to be working on the recommendations over the next couple of months in concert with the steering committee. We're anticipating that there will be a meeting in August, sometime in August. We haven't picked a date yet. But it may be the second one of these, which would be a similar presentation except sharing with you what we came up with in terms of recommendations, just in draft form, just in preliminary form. We're anticipating that by October, we should be at a point where we're in front of the planning board for a final presentation. So just to give you an idea of the timeline, we're not expecting this to drag on for another year. Now that the longest and most difficult part of it, I think, is behind us, now we have to figure out what to do with what we found out, and then share it with you, and then get it adopted so that the boards have this as a tool as quickly as possible. So, and then after that is a thank you, and I'm going to open up the floor for questions. Thank you.
So as Dave said, again, this is certainly not your last opportunity. This is actually just the first opportunity to participate. This is the community meeting number 1. Before you go, I'm going to put my laptop up on the screen, and I'm going to show you the web page that we created where we're going to be putting the documents. There's also going to be a comment. There is a comment box in there already. So I know Dave threw a lot at you. But there's going to be a description of this, like minutes of this meeting. Again, the video is going to be up there. You can watch it, share it with your friends, and you can put your comments. If you don't necessarily think of a question today, don't feel like this is your only opportunity. You can put them in the comment box, and they'll get communicated.
Is this on? Can you hear me? Okay. My name is Guy Catapano. I've been in this town 48 years. I want to commend what you're doing. I want to commend the committee, but I want to point out a couple of things that I think are gaps. I think you cannot ignore the fact that these trucks drive on other roads to get to and from these warehouses. I know you pointed out that they may be insufficient to handle the trucks, but the fact of the matter is that they are on our roads. So some form of work needs to be done about these routes and where they are, okay? When I leave my house and cross Burger Street, cross JFK, I can't tell you the number of times I see tractor trailers running the red light, all right? I know you can't change behavior, but there needs to be some way, and other towns have done this, of saying what roads these size trucks can be on and what they can't be on. That's number one. Number two, I want the committee to be aware of that as a planning group and Councilman Vassanello was involved about a month ago, we pointed out all the deficiencies on Eastern Avenue, which are the number of statistics that are crashes, fatal crashes, bicycle crashes, all these crashes. These trucks are traveling on Eastern Avenue, through JFK, through Cedar Grove, and not just Davidson. So I'm saying there needs to be a look, and I encourage the committee to look at that presentation that we put together. Okay, I'm sure if you contact Councilman Vassanella, he would give it to you, and we could talk you through it. This is important information. These are crashes that are impacting human beings. A pole, they're impacting human beings, fatal and injurious crashes. Need to look at that. That is not in the zone. Okay? That's what I'm saying here. JFK is not in the zone. Elizabeth Avenue may be, but Cedar Grove may not be. All right? These trucks are on these roads. And we're trying to make a concerted effort to have the township and the county look at Eastern Avenue and the impacts. You also have trucks coming off the Landing Lane Bridge. And they make crazy turns off that roadway. All right? You have a line of sight problems on Eastern Avenue. This is all in the study. And we're trying to make sure that things are done, because the study about Eastern Avenue that the county and the state are doing, that won't produce any results to the year 2031. At the earliest, if it gets approved by the state. That's major, major construction. We can't wait to 2031 for the next safety improvement. It needs to be done now. So I caution you, I caution the committee, I caution our council members to look at this data now and include it in your discussions. Thank you.
Norman Roberts, I live in Canal Walk, and thank you for your presentation. The one thing that I'm trying to understand is, as important as the traffic is and the inconvenience, how are you measuring, or are you measuring, health consequences of all the pollution that's generated by the large vehicles?
Well, I guess as I mentioned before, this is a master plan reexamination. So certainly quality of life is one of the primary goals of a master plan, is to advance quality. It's always one of the principal goals, especially of residential areas of the township, to preserve the quality of life. So to that extent, even though there's no, for example, a health element of a master plan, it's mostly about land use and planning for community facilities and things like that. But certainly quality of life health is a component of quality of life. So measuring air pollution, things like that is a result of the land use. So I think what we're trying to do is manage the land use, and hopefully that by association will help to manage the adverse impacts of that particular land use.
I would just say that when we use the term quality of life, we're really talking about preservation of life in this instance, with all the pollution that's generated. So we implore you to take that into account.
Thank you.
Good evening, and thank you for the presentation. My name is Louise Legoff. I'm a resident of Franklin Township, close to Eastern Avenue, for over 25 years. And I'd just like to back up the previous gentleman's statement as to the detrimental current effect of traffic on Eastern Avenue. Eastern Avenue is the proud bearer of being a grade F failing highway by county standards, with one of the highest fatality rates in the county. And I see that Section 13 JFK to Easton has dropped off the radar as far as being included in the study, and I would urge you to consider the here and now and bring it back into the study, particularly as there are developers proposing huge, high-density apartment complexes right in that vicinity, and those hearings are going on now, as Mr. Thomas can attest to. It's not just a matter of warehouses, it's also a matter of high-density housing that continues to crop up on planning and zoning agendas, which contribute to the root cause of high traffic and the resulting fatalities. These are cold, hard facts that we have to deal with. Right now, you can drive down Easton Avenue, and south of the Grove apartment complex, there's another fatality marker festooned with balloons of somebody who died. Thank you.
My name is Rosalind Sherman. I'm a former member of the planning board here, and it's been several years since I've been inactive on it, but I was very taken by the focus that's being given to traffic, because I have to tell you, during the time that I was on the board, I really never felt traffic was going to be the seminal answer to what was going on and what we needed to fix, that it was sort of traffic light. Things have changed, the world has changed, and the township's reacting, and congratulations for what it is that you're doing. I do have a question, though. This is a very serious problem, as everybody has brought up. Health issues are vital. You've got a lot of seniors here, and we're all very concerned about that. So you compare that to development in the township, the need for development in the township. We all know that we need to get some affordable apartments available for people. We know there's a shortage. People are paying huge amount of money for apartments. And I was going to point to the 11 development. I think it's an important growth for the township, but now there's another piece to making that decision. You're no longer deciding that it's a financial boon to the township. Now you have to put in the factors of what is that going to mean to health? What is that going to mean to the traffic flow in the community? It's a much broader issue than I think I anticipated when I walked in here. And I did want to tell you, I thought you did a marvelous job with your presentation. So it's going to have an impact where there'll be some other avenues of concern, not just the health issues, not just the traffic issues, the impact it's going to have on the economy. That never should come first, please believe me. But I just want to make people aware that that may turn around a lot of things that are happening, maybe for the betterment, but just wanted to put my 2 cents in there.
My name is Anthony Riccio. I have a house in Canal Walk. I've commented before the Planning Commission and as well as before the board at Canal Walk. What we're facing here is nothing unusual, but it's the result of a fractionalization of the approval process. It happened in New York back in the 70s, and when I was one of the commissioners to prepare what was the State Environmental Quality Review Act. You've got independent agencies doing a tremendous job. For the Township of Franklin, the Economic Development Unit was fantastic, but nobody was watching it. So you have someone selling property, not knowing where it's located. You have no one measuring the traffic impact, the air quality, and the health. The only way to do that is to create a level of approval beyond yours that brings in economic development, land use planning, environmental review, and then an approval process above all those agencies. So until you do that, this is going to continue. So that's my point.
Thank you for your comment. I mean, I'll just mention that it is an extremely poignant comment. One of the problems that we have in New Jersey is, as I'm sure you know, being in this state for as long as you have now, the environmental aspects where New York handles that through basically what effectively is an environmental impact statement for every application that has to be approved separately by another agency outside the local municipal government. In New Jersey, we have a home rule state, which effectively means that there are distinctions between the authority of the municipality and the county that are set forth by the state, and the state takes jurisdiction over any applications with any kind of environmental impact that they feel exceed a certain point. So if you have an application that, for example, on the Jersey Shore, that would be a Coastal Area Facility Review Act permit. That would mean that if you had an application that, if you were within that coastal area and you had an application that had 50 parking spaces or more, that would require a state oversight, and they look at it from purely an environmental standpoint. Here in central New Jersey, there's no Coastal Area Facility Review Act, there's no Highlands, you're not in the Pinelands, so you don't have that higher level of environmental review. But certainly, I think, especially and I would also say, the state has been well aware of the warehouse, the alarm around the state about the explosion of warehousing has not gone on deaf ears at the state level, and it was the Office of Planning Advocacy that put out a guidance document on distribution warehousing, and it was really an attempt to try to help municipalities figure out how to deal with it. The problem is that the planning process is a whole lot slower than the development process, so we're kind of trying to catch up. But I just appreciate your comment, and I think you're right. It's just that it's not something that, unfortunately, and these bigger environmental issues like health quality and things like that are certainly part of that, if that review actually took place. So thank you for sharing that. Is there anyone else here in the room that would like to share a question or a comment?
Hi, my name is Sudhir Shah from Canal Walk. Thanks for your presentation. This was very enlightening and educational for me. And Township, thank you for arranging this. This is very, very helpful. Maybe you can help us with some of the answers and educate us in terms of, just as people has mentioned about health and environmental and other things, noise is another byproduct of this rather. So I believe noise is not part of your study, I assume.
You're correct. The noise impacts, actually, they're to some extent depending on the locale. Generally speaking, noise is enforced by the DEP. There's the way that it's enforced is that there are people that have gotten through some kind of training in evaluating noise impacts, and when you make a complaint, you make it to the state. If there's a noise issue, they come out with a decibel reader, and I believe the standard is 50 decibels in the evening and 60 in the day at the property line. So there is a mechanism set up, but in my experience, to be frank, it is weak. And I think that if there was some delegation of that back down to the local level, there would be more effective enforcement. But generally speaking, you're kind of left up to filing a complaint with DEP to have a noise complaint investigated, and then they'll send somebody out when they can get around to it. So, yes, certainly with any kind of industrial use, not just dust and exhaust, but also noise is an impact. The planning board and the zoning board, if they're dealing with a use variance that involves a site plan, can get into it to a certain extent because your ordinance, most ordinances have what are considered to be performance standards, and they, to some extent, try to deal with noise and dust and so on. It's just that it's very difficult if you don't have an ordinance provision that you can enforce. There's not a lot they can do about, other than, for example, one of the townships that I worked for had a very unique provision that required pads to be put in dumpsters. Basically rubber pads that would be mounted on top of a concrete slab so that when the contractors come in and lift up the dumpsters and set them back down, and this was typically with shopping centers and things that were up against the backs of residential neighborhoods. So they were hearing the trucks come in the morning and lifting those dumpsters and setting them back down, so they tried to deal with the noise by requiring cushions on the pads. I've never seen it in any other town, but the planning board review letters consistently asked for it, and the developers consistently agree to put them in. So other than that, that's kind of what the planning board is limited to. Mark, I don't know if you wanted to.
I thought he was asked.
Let me just address just a little bit more on that. So the scope of work does speak to evaluating air quality and noise and community character issues from a qualitative way. There are things that in zoning, whether it's through allowing certain uses that happen to have more noise and truck traffic, maybe those uses are not permitted within a certain distance of residential areas. Maybe some of them that are very truck intensive and noisy aren't permitted at all. Maybe some have less traffic, less noise, less air quality impacts. Maybe those are permitted closer but subject to certain requirements. We haven't talked about what those might be, but just that's at the steering committee. That's kind of what we discussed at the steering committee. Those are the type things we're going to look at. We don't necessarily regulate air quality in municipal zoning, but to the degree that those impacts, we know that those impacts might come from certain land uses, we can consider that as part of the regulations or in coming up with some of the regulations.
So I'll just encourage the township to take some baseline for the noise at least, especially near the residential area rather, okay? You also mentioned about 5% growth. You're looking at 5% growth every year?
Yeah, that's taking into, these are projections out into, I don't know, I can't all off the top of my head whether it's 5 years or 10 years, somewhere in that, one of those types of time frames. So it would be per year, 5% per year, which is actually higher than it typically is. A lot of traffic studies that you might find in one of these board applications may be only assuming a 2 or 3% growth per year. So we were, again, looking to be as conservative as we can, trying to plan for a worst-case scenario and trying to respond in that way.
So things that you mentioned in your graphics here, with additional workload that may be coming up, right? Things may become C to F service level, right? So with 5% growth, you're saying that may go to F, even if you come up with some resolution there?
Well, the 5% growth was included as part of the projection with the added traffic from the applications that were approved but not built yet, to give a projection out into the future. And then we added in even more of the applications, assuming that they were going to be approved, even though they haven't yet been approved. They're they're in the pipeline. So that 5% growth is supposed to account for anything else that were not reflected in those applications that is going to happen to add traffic to the roads.
So you took the traffic impact by the application. So if, let's say, Amazon or some builder says that this will impact traffic by 1% or 2%, you took those rather, the face value.
Well, we took I can't say for sure if our traffic folks, they took the numbers from the application and they analyzed the assumptions that were made in those traffic studies. But I don't know if they took the actual projections from those traffic studies. I think they made their own analysis based on the square footage. Generally, and you'll hear this if you go to a planning board meeting, a traffic consultant will always say, well, we base our findings on the Institution of Transportation Engineers manual. So they're all supposed to look at the same book, but they may not make the same assumptions in terms of where they assume the uses are from that book. And there may be some uses that are that are less traffic generative than another. So we reviewed those studies to see what their assumptions were in those studies from the ITE manual, but our folks made their own judgments on what they should be from those manuals and came up with those numbers.
So here's a question rather. I'll just take an example of Amazon that got built there, okay, right? They probably gave an estimate 5 years ago before building it that this will create 50 trucks rather every hour or whatnot, right? Those were estimates. What is the actual now? Have you done any kind of analysis on those lines rather?
I don't know how numbers off the top of my head, but I know that the heavy traffic was accounted for because those trucks were already on the roads. So how they're accounting for heavy vehicle traffic is capturing those trucks, and the trips are being captured. I don't know if I don't have numbers off the top of my head. We can probably try to get those for you, and maybe add that as part of the Q&A. I'm trying to write down as many of your questions as I can because I want to try to put up a Q&A summary of the meeting. But I'll see if I can find if we have a number we can actually give you as to how many, if we can zoom in or drill down, whatever expression you want to use, to the Amazon warehouse and find out how many trucks are actually coming out of there. I don't know if we were able to zoom down to that level of detail, or if we're just capturing the trucks that are coming from all of the warehouses to certain intersections.
Okay.
Okay?
Secondly, related to warehouse, what we know of that they operate more at the night time from a traffic perspective compared to the daytime. All your study talks about the evening hours, morning hours, but nothing talks about the nighttime. So are there any plans to do nighttime study?
Well, I think that, again, there's parameters within reasonableness of any study. But I think you just hit on a great point, which is probably why, from a truck traffic standpoint, they all said there'd be no impact, because the trucks are all going to be traveling when nobody else is on the road. Right. That doesn't mean that they're not having an impact on that road, and especially in areas where the intersections can't handle the turning radius of the truck. So that, from a traffic study standpoint, and unfortunately the planning board they are limited in terms of their jurisdiction and their authority to the specific intersections that are caused, from a traffic flow standpoint. They really don't have any ability to be able to put any kind of standard on a use as far as trips that are on a road when nobody else is on the road. So their hands are kind of tied with that regard. But I can ask some of those questions, but I think the answer will be we are looking at a worst case scenario, and those worst case scenarios happen at the intersections.
No, a reason because, as I mentioned about the noise is much higher at the nighttime than daytime rather. So having restrictions at the nighttime traffic would definitely help, at least from that perspective rather.
Yes, and that gets to one of the other questions and comments that were made regarding effectively truck routes. And we did talk about that at the steering committee. That was one of the things the steering committee questions they raised as well. The authority over truck routes, it's not jurisdictional at the local level, but it doesn't mean we can't recommend where they could go and try to advocate for them. The township's not going to have the ability to implement them or enforce them, but we can advocate to the county and the state DOT to put them in effect, in which case they'd be signed, and there would be some authority to the local police department to enforce them. But to get them in place I think that's something that John Jarr explained when he was here with the steering committee, it's not an easy thing to get in place, but that doesn't mean we can't identify where they should be and try to make that a recommendation. Absolutely necessary.
And then the last, Mark.
Let me just speak to that real quick, too, because this is something that we also discussed at the steering committee. one of the factors that we may look at is not just necessarily proximity to residential areas, but to the degree that the industrial area is between, is to get to 287 or to get to where they want to go, are there intervening residential areas or other sensitive land uses? So do we want to perhaps restrict certain uses that have high truck volumes from going to those routes? So that's something that we may look at as well.
Okay.
And I think that gets to the issue that you're speaking of, at least partially.
Yeah.
And just to add to that, that kind of goes to where the zoning boundaries might go. When I mentioned before about this is a very large zone now, we may want to squeeze it down, put it on a diet, I guess you could say, and in doing that, factor in where the local roads are going through the areas and try to squeeze that area down to an area away from them if we can.
And the last question, after looking at those things, right, you're going to come up with some resolutions or recommendations, what is to be done, right? That if you do so-and-so things, it will never reach F level or D level or whatnot, right? Hopefully, even with the potential growth, rather.
Right, at least not fail.
Yeah. What will be the plan to monitor your recommendation that, yeah, it did work, okay? What would you recommend to the township? What should they do 2 years down the road or 5 years down the road? So these are the recommendations. We gave it to you, you have done it, but still went to F level or other levels, okay?
I think my guess is that typically a re-examination master plan makes recommendations, and it doesn't necessarily, there's an implementation component that usually comes later. But that doesn't mean that some of these recommendations can't be categorized as short-term, mid-term, and long-term. For example, say we were to recommend, one of the things we talked about in the steering committee is a transportation improvement district. That is, if some of the folks that are familiar with special improvement districts, it's a similar idea. It's a delineated area within where development is anticipated to impact roadways. And the idea is, as I mentioned before, capturing the costs of the needed improvements and then exacting a surcharge or a charge from the developers towards the district. So the money goes into the district fund and then is used to help pay for the improvements. So that's one mechanism that exists under the law that could be recommended. And that the location of that district we'd have to figure out, but that's one suggestion. But that can probably be done by local ordinance. That would be probably more of a short-term or mid-term recommendation. Road improvements might take longer. And someone mentioned the gentleman that talked about the other study mentioned the fact that the county wants to do an analysis of Easton Avenue, and by the time they get their funding from the JTPA or from the Federal Highway Administration or where it's coming from, and they select a consultant, it could be 5-10 years before you see that study. That obviously is long-term. So that we can at least try to identify some of the recommendations and suggest that they be shorter term, middle term, or longer term. And generally, the longer it takes means that you have more higher governmental agencies involved that need to cooperate than just what can be done on a local level.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, you're welcome.
Hi, I'm Paul Wolitsky. I'm chairman of the Environmental Commission. And for 10 years I've been on a commission, we have never seen a traffic study that looked at the existing road on top of what they proposed on new ones. All the traffic studies we've seen always say, my warehouse won't contribute much, but nobody takes into account just what you're doing. And so that's very important. The other thing you should know about is that the county is working on the intersection of Western Canal Road and the Manville Causeway. We started that about 2 years ago, and the county commissioner, Melanie Maroney, and Paul Drake know about it, and we're working with Walter Land, the planning director for the county. And they are now looking at this to be a major change for the intersection, because not only worried about the truck traffic going over the Manville Causeway into Western Canal Road, but it's a pedestrian crossing by the towpath where people go from the south to the north and vice versa on the towpath, and they have to cross the Manville Causeway. So that might be another intersection for you to look at. You're already on Western Canal Road. You just got to go to the end, and because with Amazon and the other two buildings that are there, traffic has traced in those areas as well. And people trying to make a left turn from Western Canal into the Little Bart, where it makes the turn into what's called still Western Canal Road. There have been accidents there, and it's a major area now for both the pedestrians and the truck traffic.
Eric Valentine, Somerset, right outside of Easton Avenue and Landing Lane intersection. First, I'd like to thank you for service on the planning board. I know, working with the public and for the public can't be easy. Just a little bit of education. If you could put up for myself and maybe, there's the same class. If you have a question, there's like 5 other people up. Could you put up your process for the master plan up? And while you do, I just want to, offer my support to the words of the people who spoke about Easton Avenue as we talk about this industrial zoning and the downstream effects that it has, particularly on Easton Avenue, is pretty horrific. I stand here not just as a resident, but also as a statistic. Right before Christmas, I was sitting with a pecan pie in my front seat and a can of whipped cream, and somebody hit me in behind so hard as I sat at that light at that very intersection, they tore the tire right off my car and kept going. So it's a very meaningful thing, in addition to the crosses and all the memorials to the dead that are on the side of the road. So as you plan for the future, as other other citizens have asked, please look at what's happening to that corridor, because a lot of these traffic trucks are going to end up traveling to that corridor. It's a mess now, and it's only going to get worse. So, again, to be brief, and forgive my naive questions, like I said, this is new to me, but when I look at the flow chart and I see the draft report, planning board staff review, where is the master plan created? Because you mentioned a couple of times about the horse getting out of the barn. I don't know who owns the horse, I don't know who rides the horse, I don't even know where the barn is. So if you could help me with that, would be
That's what you get when you use a cliche, right? But, generally, under New Jersey land use law, it's the planning board that has sole and jurisdiction.
All right. So if I look at that flow chart, then the draft report then is created by the planning board staff. So it's not really review, that should be creation. Is that correct?
Well, in this case, we're effectively working on it on behalf of the planning board, but ultimately they have to vote to adopt it. So they're the only ones that can adopt it and approve it. We basically, professional staff help them, and that's fairly typical in any town. The professional staff helps to prepare it, the technical aspects of it, but the board has to discuss it, deliberate over it, and agree on it.
So it's the planning board staff then, you're paid professionals, that the different components that go into the plan, you're the SMEs that the planning board looks to and to put together the draft plan.
Well, in combination, we're actually consultants that have been brought in to assist the planning board, but the planning board staff is like a filter, and also the steering committee is a filter.
Okay.
So from the planning board staff will look at it from a planning technical standpoint, give us comments back. Then the steering committees will see it, give us comments back from a community standpoint before the final result gets out.
And that was going to be my next question. Just again, I know it's a simplistic flow chart. I know it's much more complex. So if you don't mind. So what I'm taking away from this, then, that draft report is put together by the professional staff with input from the planning board. Then eventually the draft version of that report goes to the full planning board for review. Is that correct?
Yes, the full planning board will hold a public hearing.
Well, that's next step.
Right.
That's next.
Yeah. Well, the full board will give us feedback. But yes, and just to be clear, we're tasked as consultants with preparing the document. The draft document, but that document needs to be vetted, and it's vetted technically by the planning staff, and really the planning staff is predominantly Mark, their township planner, and other officials from the township that are going to want to see that document and give feedback on it first. They then because of their technical knowledge of what's going on in front of the boards and within the township in general. The steering committee vets and gives comments to us based from the overall community standpoint, and then the community gives us comments as a whole.
Now, is that happens at the public hearing?
Well, we're going to be doing another one of these before we ever get to the public hearing. So,
and again, and this is, I'll finish up right with this, and that was my last question, because I come from a corporate environment. I come from an executive environment where I was a consultant as well. So I'm kind of used to Gantt charts and flow charts, right? So I see a public hearing. What I'd love to see is an arrow that goes back that says public input was taken and the plan was revised, changed, modified based on the people, the will of the people, the will of the community. Because again, I applaud yourselves as professionals. I applaud the planning board trying to, again, herd cats and try to get this thing done. I can't even imagine how complex it is. But ultimately, we have to live with that, right? When the horse runs out of the barn and tramples over the vegetables, it's our vegetables. And I say that because I come from New York. I come from Staten Island, which is one thing I love about Franklin. It was settled at the same time my home was settled. My home once looked like this. It's now been paved over, built up. And how many times I would go to a public hearing, which was nothing more than a rubber stamp of what they were already going to do, and no matter what anybody said, nothing was going to change. And I don't want to see this happen to your home, to the home that I adopted. Thank you very much.
No, we'll hear you. Thanks.
You take into account the ratio of trucks to cars when you analyze the traffic light intersection. I know of two specific intersections. One is Campus to Western Canal Road, and the other is traffic coming from the north, exiting 287 onto Western Canal Road. Okay? On that one truck can get through the traffic light. If there's no trucks, 10 or 15 cars can get through the traffic light. The same thing, it is so hard for the trucks coming out of campus to make the right turn to go to 287. Again, maybe 1 or 2 trucks can get through the light, whereas 10 or 15 cars can get through. That's it.
No, that's a great point. I do believe that they had cameras when they did their counts, so they got visuals of who was going through those intersections. So I think they factored that into their heavy vehicle analysis as well. But that's a great point. Thanks. I believe you did.
You've been here a long time. Marlon Kwan, I'm in Canal Walk as well. But first of all, I want to applaud you for having such a detailed analysis for a first meeting for the community. I think it's extremely important and unfortunately long overdue. But having said that, the problem isn't so much intuitively we had known what you factually put out, which is that traffic has just been ridiculous, right? And as you're hearing from other individuals, beyond the 14 or so intersections, there's quite a bit more that's leaking out from all of this traffic. So having contained your analysis and having decided that, you're going to look at possibly shrinking the perimeter of the BI zone or other ways to alleviate the problem. You mentioned again, and I'm going to repeat it, right? The horse is out of the barn to some extent. So, are there deterrents to be able to restrict even the zoning board from approving things that are desirous to be built by developers but are not good for this town? And where I say that is, as an example, I would suggest that you have, as I believe you touched on, different levels of warehouses, but based on truck bays, not on square footage. And I'll tell you why. Because just like Amazon, square footage can be multiplied by the number of times it turns over on the number of trucks that go in and out of their facility. So square footage no longer matters where it mattered before on traditional warehouses. Now you have constant turnover 24/7, and that square footage could be multiplied 5 or 10-fold. So what I'm asking is that, A, can we have some sort of suggestion, ordinance, where you create levels of different types of warehouses based on truck bays, right? And then the second is touching on your other point about having a district tax, perhaps taxing based on the number of bays and the number of turnover periods. Because we all know that developers come in and say, what they use the traffic, national traffic, whatever, blah, 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 right? And based on that, they say we only have 50 trucks that come in and out of the facility on any given day. Well, that's not true. We all know that's not true. So what I'm asking is that as you study this and as you make your recommendations, we need to look at ways to be a deterrent for things that maybe this administration believes in, but another administration may not. But that we have a semblance of rules set in place that forces them to stick with the plan.
I'll try to catch it from the top to the bottom. You had asked about the zoning board. Typically, I think the one or two red, the largest of the red sites on that map was a zoning board denial, if I'm not mistaken. And if it was a denial, so it either was the zoning board or the planning board. It was okay. So I know that there's no, to get to your question, the zoning board gets its authority from the municipal land use law. If they make a decision, and my experience with zoning boards is that they're extremely careful because they don't want to be in a position where their decision gets challenged in court, because that costs the township money to defend. It's just not, and they don't want to have a decision reversed by the court, so they're very careful, in my experience, working with many zoning boards across the state for many years. But again, there are individuals who are charged with making a judgment based on the testimony they hear, and they're given legal structure by their board attorney. They operate under training that they get regarding the municipal land use law. They do the best they can. Now I'm going to have to think about the other parts of your question, but I guess the answer is that you're absolutely right. There are very specialized warehouses now that are designed for one use and one use only. Their designs are very transparent in terms of whether they have bays on both sides, for example, where we're taking a container off on one side and they're sending it out in two or three other trucks on the other side, and they're just crossing the path. There's other, the last mile, for example, may not have very many bays for big trucks, but may be using smaller trucks. So they may not be putting big trucks on the road, but they're putting a lot of small trucks on the road. So now they're getting more and more data on each one of these types. So we can get better parking standards. And again, as Mark mentioned before, where we have the real heavy generators, as you mentioned before, the having all the bays that can turn over space, we can change the parameters of the ordinance for parking at least. It may not affect what the Institute of Traffic Transportation Engineer says about trip generation, but it might affect how many parking spaces we require, and we may not even permit that use at all. If Mark said before, if it's the type of warehouse based on its design that we know is going to pump a lot of trucks out onto the road, especially depending on where they're located. So we're going to try to be as specific as we can for each of these uses, define them separately, regulate them separately. The only ones that are going to be permitted are going to be the ones that the township feels are not going to be adversely impacting the residential areas. So that's the best I can tell you as far as that. I hope I kind of covered it sort of generally, because that was packed with, that question was packed. It was very rich.
Let me just address one thing, and I know this question has come up in other contexts. So I think there was a question, basically, is there a way to prevent somebody from going to the zoning board and asking for a use variance? And the answer to that ultimately is no. Somebody wants to propose the Freedom Tower in a residential area, they can do that. Doesn't mean they're going to get approved. But one of the ways, and perhaps the smartest way to do that, is we can't say you can't go to the zoning board. But one of the things that an applicant has to do when they go to the zoning board is one of the many things they have to prove is that it doesn't have a substantial detriment to the master plan. So we could certainly put language in there, in addition to not allowing certain warehouses in certain areas, explaining why it's particularly inappropriate in these different areas. And that's going to raise the hurdle even more. So when the applicant does go to the zoning board and says, oh, you should let us go in this area, and then the board could point to the master plan and say, well, the master plan says that kind of warehouse is particularly inappropriate in that area for these reasons. So that makes it if the master plan's silent, the zoning board doesn't have anything to really go on, right. At least nothing written in the master plan. But if we address it directly, that raises the hurdle.
Yeah, that's a great point too, because we call that the negative criteria. The negative criteria is two parts: the impact on the neighborhood, the surrounding properties, and the impact on the welfare, on the master plan and zone plan. And with this re-exam now amending the master plan at that point, it gives both boards more ammunition to say, well, how can your planner say that this doesn't have any adverse impact on the intent of the master plan when the master plan says right here on page X that it does? And the planning board can use that for bulk variances as much as the zoning board can use it for use variances. But Mark's right; it's particularly a higher standard to meet for a use variance when it has a detrimental impact on the master plan. Yes, ma'am.
Okay, I just want to talk about the county. You said about the county, you're going to have to work with the county on the roads. So one of the county roads is Weston Canal Road. And my thing about that is I've seen the county work on the Manville Road through Manville is a county road. And that's has become a total mess. They went from 1 lane to 2 lanes, back to 1, and there's people still dying and many accidents on that road. And the problem with Weston Canal is you have no room for expansion because it's on the road. And right now, I see on Facebook where people are posted or in front of Hooters, there's people on the shoulder waiting to get onto 287. So it has become a 2-lane road where it's not supposed to be a 2-lane road. People are on the shoulder there. And so if the county takes over this intersection, this is going to be a destruction again. There's no way to expand. The other day I was on that road and I had to wait through a green light because a truck was taking 2 lanes to make the left turn. So, and my problem again is there's no way to expand. How is the county going to do this? And I'm afraid of the county because, like I said, of what they did to Manville. And that's my...
I think we have time for one more. So go ahead, sir. Yep.
I'll make it quick. Jim Johnston, Somerset. Thank you for your presentation. You mentioned a town ordinance that the Franklin Town Council passed in 2020. That's 4 years ago. And the main thing that ordinance did was it rezoned Atrium Drive and Davidson Avenue to business and industry to allow for warehouses, okay? Previous to that, they did not allow. Now, and that to me was the ideal location to put warehouses, okay? Because Atrium Drive and Davidson Avenue, they are right next to Route 287. They're far away from any residential areas or retail areas or schools. So that would be the ideal place. Now, what has happened? That was 4 years ago. So what has happened in the 4 years since then? All right. In the 4 years since then, instead of putting the warehouses on those two streets, I see that they've been approving warehouses all over town that are right next to residential areas or retail areas. Like, for example, take Elizabeth Avenue. Elizabeth Avenue, the shop right there, that already has 2 warehouses on either side with the possibility of a 3rd warehouse. And 2 years ago, the planning board approved a 400,000 square foot warehouse right next to or very close to the Elizabeth Avenue school, the elementary school on Elizabeth Avenue. I mean, now to me, that's the worst place to put a warehouse. So my suggestion is, you asked what to do with the warehouses that are still in the pipeline. My suggestion is put them all on Atrium Drive or Davidson. Okay, thank you.
Okay, so again, I want to thank everybody for coming. The last thing I wanted to do is just show everybody, it's not populated yet, but where the BI study is, all the information is going to be. So the website is franklintwpnj.org. Committees and commissions, under Planning Board, BI study. So there's a web page for it. And then we're going to populate the documents, videos of the various committees, the various meetings, and then there's a comment section in here. Put whatever comments, whatever questions you have, and the committee and the planning board will receive them, obviously, as well as the consultant. So again, thank you and have a good evening.
Thank you all.